This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Sometimes the faithful among us do things that are exceptional and rarely understood. The loss of a loved one is among the greatest losses one can face. To have a loved one murdered in cold blood is a pain many would think incomprehensible. So how did one woman come to forgive the man who killed her sister? Jeanne Bishop talks about that in Change of Heart, Justice, Mercy, and Making Peace with My Sister's Killer. And then, amid our culture that emphasizes exposing ever more of oneself, some women take on a Jewish practice of covering their hair. Exploring why and how is Elizabethtown College professor Amy Milligan in Hair, Headwear, and Orthodox Jewish Women, Kallah's Choice. But first, here's my interview with Jeanne Bishop. You had in your family a story of a tragic murder that it's more gruesome than frankly many that I've heard of.
Yeah, 25 years ago on April 7th, 1990, my younger sister Nancy and her husband Richard were coming home from this family dinner that we'd had to celebrate them having their first child. Nancy was 3 months pregnant. And so my family had gathered at this Italian restaurant in Chicago, and I had gone home to my apartment, and my parents went home to their house in the suburbs, and Nancy and Richard went back to their townhouse, and the killer was waiting for them.
The killer of your sister and brother-in-law was a man who on his own really never showed remorse. He claimed innocence at his trial. He lied and perjured himself at his trial to claim innocence, tried to pin it on somebody else.
He was this skinny teenager, with bushy hair, and he took the stand and blamed it on a friend of his, said that a friend had come to his house with a gun and said, "Here, hide this for me, I just killed 2 people with it." The story was preposterous. He had the burglary tools that were used to break into my sister's townhouse. We even learned that he had gone to their funeral.
Your initial response is kind of shocking. The very first moment that you found out that that your sister was killed, you had this gut reaction statement that you said in front of everybody. What was that?
I don't want to hate anyone. And I don't even know where that came from, but I think it was just this idea that until that moment when I found out that someone had deliberately snuffed out the life of my beautiful sister and her husband and their baby, that evil had intruded into our lives and that it had to be responded to. It required a response, and I knew if that response was hatred and bitterness and vengeance towards whoever did it, that it would consume me.
You talk about how this idea of, in the eyes of God, there is no difference between us. But first of all, there is a very clearly delineated difference between the two of you. He's in prison and you're not. He is, and he is in prison because of his actions, and you are not in prison because of actions you haven't taken.
Right. What I mean by no difference is this. First of all, I want to make it absolutely clear that my forgiveness of him is not the forgiveness like when somebody bumps into you in the hallway and they say, "Oh, sorry," and you go, "Oh, that's okay." What he did was evil. It is not okay. When I talk about the crime, I tell some of the chilling details like I do in the book, because I want people to understand that I'm not forgiving him because what he did isn't that bad. It was. And there need to be consequences for that. I mean, one of the things that we talk about is, how long should someone serve in prison for taking 3 human lives? Because we're having a kind of debate about that, and I describe that in the book when I describe our, one of our first visits. There needs to be an appropriate amount of punishment, no matter how sorry he is or how safely we could release him into society. That's very important. What I'm saying is that both of us are capable of redemption. That's how we're alike. We have this tendency in our criminal justice system to say, you know what, we're going to throw you away. We're just going to crumple you up like human garbage and toss you. We're either going to take your life, so we're just going to end your life. We're going to play God and say, now your life is over, death penalty. Or we're going to throw you into the maw of prison until the day you die, no matter what. And we're never going to turn around and take a second look at you. And what I'm saying about him is that he is as capable of change as I am. I changed. He changed.
And now, head covering among Orthodox Jewish women with Amy Milligan. So there are 3 consumers of head coverings in America. Who are these 3 consumers?
Orthodox Jewish women, women who have medical reasons for covering their hair, and African American women.
And how do Orthodox Jewish women play into that market? And how big a market are they in that larger culture?
It really depends on where you are, because obviously in areas that have larger Jewish populations, they're at higher rates of consuming these wigs. But if you look in Baltimore, for example, where there is a sizable Orthodox population, a lot of the stores actually have sections that are dedicated to all three areas of consumers. So I don't know statistically exactly what percentage, but a decent amount.
You examined this synagogue in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with you say it has approximately 80 households as members, and it becomes this fascinating kind of trajectory or flow among those who fully cover their hair, those who partially cover their hair. What are some of the choices that are going on there?
I think it's a really interesting case study, because even though the synagogue has 80 families that are members, it doesn't mean that they have necessarily 80 families that fully participate. But because of their geographic location, they all have to come together as the one traditional or one Orthodox synagogue. If they were somewhere else, they would probably fragment off into different synagogues based on levels of observance. So there's women there who fully cover with a tichel and wouldn't even consider wearing a sheitel. There are women.
The tichel is the head scarf,
right?
And the sheitel is the wig.
Is the wig.
And yeah.
And then there are women who don't cover at all. So it really runs the full spectrum of how covered women are. And there's this interesting kind of intermediary area that I was very intrigued by, of women who cover partially, so who will come and in certain contexts will cover their hair, usually not for reasons of modesty or because they feel pressure, but out of respect for the institution, respect for someone who's there. But as soon as they leave, they're not wearing skirts, they're not covering their collarbones and elbows, they're certainly not covering their hair.
What is it about hair in terms of a Jewish symbol that makes it so special and distinct from other symbols?
Particularly if we're talking about women, I think it's one of the most external ways of showing religious observance. So a lot of the other things that women might do, candle lighting or keeping a kosher kitchen, are very private and they're done within the home. Sexual purity laws, again, something that you're not really talking about or showing others. And hair becomes this very external way of communicating identity of how one feels about the self.
I wear a yarmulke. Probably the vast majority of people in America will be able to say, there's a Jew, right? But with these women's hair coverings, it's, first of all, far from clear that sometimes that they're even there, and then certainly what they're meant to indicate.
So then it really comes back to, what does it mean for you as an individual, that it creates self-meaning. So it's playing with this agency again, like we were talking about, that it's creating meaning for the individual, that it's a way of saying, this matters to me, that it's almost ritualized, that when I get up in the morning, this is something that I do for myself that affirms my Jewishness, and throughout the day I'm reminded of it. So even if it's a symbol that's not necessarily read by someone else, it's a symbol that I understand, and it creates a symbolic insider language for other Jews who can look at them and say, yeah, okay, I know what you're doing.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, Iowa Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast and the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.